T9C got the fucking juice.
Silver's the new gold.
Take this shit serious.
T9C got the fucking juice.
Silver's the new gold.
Take this shit serious.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of JT Sports Live. I'm your host, JT. I just gave you guys my NFL record predictions on the last episode. On this episode, I'm going to be giving you guys my SEC record predictions for all SEC teams going into this upcoming season. There's a big hater on ESPN that keeps spewing bad takes about Lamar Jackson, and I'm just sick and tired of it, so I just got to go off on this dude tonight. The Carolina Panthers could shock the world this year. The New York Jets, they continue to make headlines as always, but for some strange reason, despite the dysfunction that they have going on, I'm still confident that Aaron Rodgers can lead the Jets to the promised land this year. I got rookie expectations for Bo Nix this year. How good is he going to be year one in Denver? Everybody seems to be betting against Colorado this year. Their over-under win total is 5.5, but I think you could be throwing away a lot of cash betting it on Colorado not winning more than 5 games this year. There was a preseason poll that came out ranking every Big Ten team going into this year, and Ohio State, as always, came in as the preseason number 1. I got some thoughts on that, and I can't believe that it seems as if I'm the only person in the world that still believes Lincoln Riley is a good coach and USC is going to have a successful season year 1 in the Big Ten. Before we get into all of that, here's a quick word from our sponsor. In football, we all know that no quarterback can win without good protection up front. It's also important that you protect yourself from data brokers who sell your personal information online to scammers, spammers, and anybody else who may want to target you. That's why you should use Aura, today's sponsor of this episode. or shows which data brokers are passing away your information on the internet and automatically submits opt-out requests on your behalf. Go to aura.com/JT Sports in description or pin comment down below to get a 14-day free trial and protect your personal information from being exposed online. Cleaning up your information online not only helps reduce the amount of spam you receive, but it also protects you from hackers who could use this info to help gain access into your social media accounts, bank accounts, or other sensitive information. Go to our sponsor, aura.com/JT Sports in description or pin comment down below to gain access to your 14-day free trial and protect yourself from hackers looking to gain access into your sensitive information online. All right, shout out to everybody that's tuned in on the live stream. Shout out to my guy Kate Rome with the $5.99 donation. We greatly appreciate it. He says Lamar Jackson and Colorado are amazing and haters were rude today. Stoked for the SEC predictions. I appreciate you, man. I appreciate everybody that's tuned in on YouTube. Remember that we're not just a YouTube channel. We are a podcast. You can find this episode and all of our previous ones in audio format on all podcasting platforms, Apple, Spotify, Amazon. If you listen to podcasts, what are you doing, man? Go ahead, check us out there. Give us a 5-star review. Make sure that you follow us on Instagram and X. If you have a question that you would like answered on a future episode, you can send them in the DMs on Instagram at JT_Sports_ and on X at JT_Sports__. And before I get into the SEC predictions, man, I just got to go ahead and get this up on out the way. Another day, some more Lamar Jackson hate, but what's new? ESPN's biggest Lamar Jackson hater is back at it again. Stephen A. Smith recently came out and said that the criticism that Lamar has received is only because he hasn't won the Super Bowl yet, and that's just a flat-out lie. Now, what prompted Stephen A. Smith to spew out this nonsense is that at the start of training camp recently, head coach John Harbaugh pushed back on the criticisms of Lamar Jackson. He said that we're all dialed in on making sure that we have the best supporting cast and all the pieces around Lamar Jackson for him not only to win a championship, but for him to become the greatest quarterback in NFL history. To me, Lamarvelous is already one of the most talented QBs to ever play this game. But the criticism that he receives, I just think is really unwarranted. He has to be the most overhated player in league history. This is somebody who is a 2-time MVP. He has the second best win-loss record in the National Football League since he became the starting quarterback of the Ravens, only behind Patrick Mahomes. And people still continue to hate on Lamar Jackson, but let Stephen A. Smith tell it. Nobody hates on Lamar outside of the reason for him not winning a Super Bowl, which is BS because you still have people who continue to use these outdated running back jokes, say that he still isn't a good passer, even though he had a higher completion percentage than Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, and Joe Burrow last year. He also was top 5 in QBR. People still continue to say that he's a playoff choker. They called his second MVP run one of the worst in league history. Lamar gets more hate for more than just him not being able to win the Super Bowl. He gets hated because people can't live with the reality that they were wrong about him when he was coming out of college. Everybody thought that he was just going to be this bona fide scrambling quarterback. He was going to be unable to develop as a passer. And 7 years later, Lamar Jackson is up 2 MVPs, several All-Pros, and he has accomplished everything that you can achieve at this level, but hoisting that Lombardi trophy. You see, I remember when Lamar first got paid, Stephen A. Smith and Shannon Sharp were trying to make it seem like the Ravens made a mistake extending him because they were questioning if they were going to get their money's worth. You see, the problem with the Lamar Jackson haters out there is that they hold him to a different standard that they don't hold that they don't hold Joe Burrow and Josh Allen to. I never hear Stephen A. Smith and Shannon Sharp going off on Joe Burrow or Josh Allen for when they come up short in the postseason. Neither one of those guys has Super Bowls, but I don't hear them jumping at the bit for why those guys don't have championships. They make all the excuses in the world for them, but nobody ever holds those dudes accountable for not being able to get it done. But Lamar Jackson, though, he's a playoff choker for the Ravens losing to Kansas City in the past AFC Conference Championship game, even though he had a pretty good performance. The reason why they lost that game wasn't because Lamar played bad. They lost it because maybe you had a key fumble by Zay Flowers inside the 5 that if he never would have gave up the pigskin, would have been a touchdown. He also had a costly taunting penalty as well. And Todd Monken, for as good as what he was last year, he got into that AFC Championship game and just looked like a shell of himself. Only gave the running backs 5 total carries, didn't want to run the football. This coaching staff always fails Lamar when the Ravens get to the biggest stage. But nobody ever wants to hear it, though, because it's more popular. It generates more clicks when you just hate on Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson is one of the greatest quarterback talents that this league has ever seen. Every time you have a black quarterback that has a lot of athleticism, people always want to compare him to Lamar when there will never be another Lamar. He's one of one. He's a unicorn. We will never see a quarterback as gifted as what LJ is. Stephen A. Smith continues to say that nobody criticizes Lamar for other than him not being able to get it done in the postseason, when that's BS. You go on Instagram, X, whatever social media site you use, everybody still continues to hate on Lamar Jackson, trying to push a narrative that just fairly is untrue. He is a fantastic passer. He was one of the most accurate quarterbacks in the league last year. Not only is he a great passer, but just overall from a talent standpoint, he's one of the best quarterbacks to ever play this game if we're just talking about pure talent. And I get that Patrick Mahomes is able to make every throw in the book, but there's not a single thing that Patrick Mahomes can do that Lamar can't. But there are things that Lamar can do that Patrick Mahomes would never be able to do. He's the best dual threat quarterback in league history. He's Michael Vick times 100. Michael Vick was nowhere as gifted as what Lamar Jackson is as a passer. Lamar Jackson has revolutionized what it means to be a dual threat quarterback. That's why Justin Fields got drafted so high years back when he went in the first round by the Chicago Bears. That's why Anthony Richardson got drafted inside the top 5 by the Indianapolis Colts. People are trying to find the next version of Lamar Jackson. There's a reason why he's second in the league and wins only second to Patrick Mahomes, because every time he's healthy, the Ravens always have a chance to win it all, and they always are in contention to get the number 1 seed in the AFC. He's only 27, about to be 28 years old. He still has plenty of time to win the Super Bowl. People make it seem as if Lamar Jackson is out of time and he'll never get it done. Peyton Manning, for the majority of his career, was widely considered to be overrated, despite the numerous MVP awards that he had and all of the great numbers that he put up in the regular season. But come playoff time, Peyton Manning often didn't deliver. There have been plenty of good quarterbacks that have come and gone in this league who have struggled to hoist that Lombardi trophy. And as of right now, within the last 5 years, there's only been one active quarterback who, not named Patrick Mahomes, has won a Super Bowl, and that's Matthew Stafford. If you're going to criticize Lamar Jackson for not winning a Super Bowl, you gotta have that same energy for Joe Burrow and Josh Allen. But I never hear nobody go as hard on those dudes for not getting it done as they do Lamar Jackson. I love Stephen A. Smith and Shannon Sharp, but they are the biggest Lamar Jackson haters in the national media right now, in my opinion. And their takes on Lamar Jackson are so damn bogus, because how are you going to question if the Ravens are going to get their money's worth out of Lamar? But they were both happy that Trevor Lawrence got paid the amount that he received in his recent contract extension, even though he hasn't proven as much as what Lamar has. Stephen A. Smith is the biggest hypocrite when it comes to Lamar Jackson. Either he's blaming him for the Ravens losing, like how he tried to put the Ravens loss to the Pittsburgh Steelers last year all on Lamar's shoulders, even though I counted 6 to 7 drop passes in that game. He tried to put the AFC Championship loss all on Lamar, even though there were plenty of other factors that went into the Ravens losing that game. I'm not making excuses for Lamar Jackson, but what I am saying is that it's not fair that the goalpost gets moved, so it's more convenient to hate on Lamar, but we don't have this same energy when it comes to Josh Allen and Joe Burrow. Josh Allen can't beat Mahomes. He can't beat Joe Burrow. He can never even get to a conference championship game. But you got executives out here who put him over Lamar Jackson. Joe Burrow, as much as I love him, he's not better than Lamar Jackson. Is he a better passer than Lamar? Yes, but he's not a better overall QB than him. Nobody talks about how Lamar Jackson has saved John Harbaugh's job. The only reason John Harbaugh has a job is because of Lamar. But you don't hear people in the national media say that. You don't hear people ever give Lamar Jackson the credit that he so rightfully deserves, because people can accept the fact that they were wrong about what they thought he was going to be when he was coming out of Louisville. I'm so frustrated with the lack of transparency that these national media folks have when it comes to assessing Lamar Jackson, because they never hold him in the same regard as they do these other QBs, man. When Lamar Jackson does something wrong, everybody makes a big deal of it. Rather if it's him choosing not to show up for a day of mini camp or whatever, rather if it's him having an off game, everybody always magnifies when Lamar Jackson does something wrong or when he comes up short, but they never have that same energy for any other quarterback who's regarded to be elite at this position. Stephen A. Smith, I love you, man, but you are extremely biased against Lamar Jackson when it comes to talking about him. Every time you got an opportunity to talk about Lamar, you always trash him. You never give him the respect he deserves. We all know that he's box office. Nobody questions his passing ability. People do question his passing ability, Stephen A. Smith. Do you check social media? Because I still see millions of people on the net screaming how Lamar's overrated. He's never thrown more than 30 passing touchdowns in the season. Even though he did that his first MVP run, there are still people that hate on Lamar Jackson nonstop. And for you to say that he only gets criticized because he hasn't won the Super Bowl makes you extremely tone deaf. I'm sick of y'all hating on this young legend out of Pompano, man. Give Lamar Jackson the respect he deserves. He has the second best win-loss record in the National Football League, and every time he's fully healthy, the Ravens are always in the conversation to have the 1 seed. When will the hate end, and when will Lamar Jackson get the credit that he so rightfully deserves? I saw somebody under one of my TikToks when I was talking about Lamar Jackson earlier saying how he had one of the worst MVP seasons in league history. Utterly disrespectful, because stats don't always define what it means to be the most valuable player. You take Lamar Jackson off the Ravens, not only are they not a playoff team, but they probably don't even have a record above 500. Lamar is easily one of the greatest quarterbacks of this generation. He's going to be a future first ballot Hall of Famer. We have never seen a quarterback that has the ability to not just throw the football at the elite level, but he's also a dynamic runner. Last year, he had career highs in every statistical category passing but touchdowns. And he had career lows in every single rushing category. But yet, there's still people that think he's a better runner than he is a thrower. Stop with this BS nonsense, Stephen A. Smith. You know damn well Lamar Jackson gets way more criticism outside of him not being able to win the Super Bowl. People hate on Lamar Jackson for no reason at all. He's won in the playoffs. He's not a playoff choker. It's not like he's 0-6, 0-7 in the playoffs. He's not Dak Prescott. At least Lamar is capable of having a good playoff performance. What about Josh Allen? You know, he melted in the fourth quarter against Kansas City last year. Where's the criticism for him? Where's the criticism for when Joe Burrow lost to Patrick Mahomes the last time he went up against him in the postseason? They moved the goalposts to hate on Lamar, but they give all the other quarterbacks not named LJ passes for coming up short. Patrick Mahomes is the closest thing that we have to Michael Jordan in sports today. When Michael Jordan played during the 90s, the only time any other NBA team won the NBA Finals was when Jordan was retired and out of the sport. And every time he came back, he won more championships. He won 3 before he retired, came out of retirement with the 4 or 5, and won 3 more. That's how dominant Patrick Mahomes has been. There's only been one quarterback that's defeated Patrick Mahomes in the postseason, in the Super Bowl, and that's been Tom Brady. Joe Burrow will be the second. But in terms of active QBs, it's only Joe Burrow. And that's because he had a great all-around team performance in that game. The Ravens didn't have that against Kansas City in this past year's conference championship game because their team, their coaching staff, felt Lamar. The defense showed up. Todd Monken and his play calling didn't. The wide receiving play didn't. Zay Flowers choked away that touchdown that could have made that a one-possession game. He also had a costly turn penalty, but people put that loss all on Lamar Jackson. You think about the interception that he threw into double coverage, which pretty much sealed the win for Kansas City. That's the only mistake Lamar made in that game. Outside of that, the rest of his team was making mistakes. When are we going to start holding the rest of these other elite quarterbacks accountable as what people like to hold Lamar accountable for? If you're going to blame Lamar Jackson for not winning a Super Bowl, then also have that same energy when it comes to Joe Burrow, Josh Allen, or whoever else people consider to be an elite quarterback. Shout out to everybody in the chat, man. Shout out to my guy, Kate Roan. He says Cam Newton, too. Everybody respects the hell out of him with no ring. Lamar completed a pass to himself, too. Yeah, he's incredible, man. I just am so frustrated with the Lamar Jackson hate because it's just like nobody ever has the same criticisms for him as they have for other QBs. Other QBs, when they struggle, they get a pass. But Lamar Jackson, all his struggles get magnified for some reason. I just don't understand it, man. Maybe they got some little secret grudge. Maybe Lamar Jackson, denied the interview request on Stephen A. Smith's show or something like that. Maybe Lamar ain't want to go on Club Shay Shay, but there's some strong precedents against Lamar Jackson anytime Stephen A. and Shannon Sharp talk about him on First Take. And it's always a BS narrative, bro. Always. It's time for me to give you guys my SEC record predictions for the upcoming college football season. We got to get into it. We're going to start off with the Arkansas Razorbacks. I got them going 0-8 in conference play, 3-9 overall. Outside of the easy gimmies that they have and they're out of conference, I don't see this squad having too much success this year. We know Sam Pittman's on the hot seat. He hired Bobby Petrino to be his offensive coordinator. Don't really see that working out. You lost KJ Jefferson, one of the better quarterbacks that Arkansas has had in recent memory, to UCF via the portal. You replace him with Trenton Green. Trenton Green is nice on College Football 25, but in real life, think of DJ Uiagalelei, but way more athletic. And that's Trenton Green. He's inconsistent as a passer. He has inconsistent footwork. He's not really that accurate. His numbers at Boise State are a little bit inflated because of the weaker competition that they faced off against. But I just don't really see it with Arkansas this year. Not only are they lacking talent at wide receiver, but they also have some huge concerns defensively. This is possibly going to be the worst team in the SEC this year. And normally it's Vanderbilt, but Arkansas, they kind of hold the cake to Vandy this year. I think they end up going 3-9, and they don't win a single game in conference play. And we probably see Sam Pittman fired around week 6, week 7 of the year. Vanderbilt, we got them up next. I have them finishing with a better record than Arkansas at 4-8. 1-7 in conference play. Clark Lee is a really likable guy, but it's so hard to win at Vandy because anytime you have some good talent, they always leave for more money or a bigger school and the portal. And Vanderbilt, even though they play in the toughest conference in college football, they don't prioritize football as much as they should. They're the Harvard of the SEC. They only care about academics. And if that's the case, they probably should just move on to a different conference that cares more about academics than they do football, because last year when Vanderbilt played, you could tell how unserious they were about football because they were playing games in a home stadium that was under construction. Literally, if you watch Vanderbilt play last year, they were playing games at a home stadium that was not finished. They're undergoing renovations, and it was just so ugly to watch because it's like, dude, you mean to tell me that y'all didn't have no other place y'all could have played football at? You're playing football in a stadium that's not finished? Yeah, that shows me how unserious you are about trying to win in the toughest conference in America. And if Clark Lee can find a way to get the 6 wins this year, there's definitely a strong argument for him winning Coach of the Year because Vanderbilt has questions at nearly every position. They do have a pretty decent quarterback coming in. They got the quarterback from New Mexico State. Remember when Auburn got upset against that random team at home? Yeah, he was the dude who was at the helm underneath center when New Mexico State shocked Auburn. So maybe Vanderbilt could surprise us since they could have a decent QB, but the wide receiving core just isn't there. The offensive line is rough, and defensively, they don't really got too much talent there. It's just hard to see Vanderbilt having a good season this year. Florida, I have them going 5-7, 2-6 in SEC play. The problem I have for Florida this year doesn't have anything to do with talent. It's the coaching. Billy Napier and the few seasons that he's been at Florida, they haven't really made any progress. And I get that progress isn't always linear, but for Florida to not be bowl eligible any year is unacceptable. And the excuses that folks like to make about Billy Napier is that, well, he inherited such a bad program when he first got there because Dan Mullen didn't recruit that well. Let's not act like Dan Mullen was recruiting 1-star and 2-star guys. Like, there was a good enough amount of talent that he won 6 games year 1. And then we get into year 2, they go 5-7. But they had a lot of close losses due to bad clock management, poor in-game decision-making. Let's not forget when he had the 12, 13 players on the field. This just is a team that under Billy Napier, they're not disciplined. They're not ready to play. His play calling isn't that good neither. If Florida ends up having a good season, it's because Billy Napier finally took a step up as a head coach. And I just think at this point, we know what he is. He's a good G5 coach, but he's not meant to be coaching at a P4 level. It doesn't matter how tough Florida's schedule is, because when you're in the SEC, you're always going to have a tough schedule due to the implications of conference realignment. So I got Florida going 5-7 this year. They definitely are a team that could surprise us all if the coaching improves, because this record prediction has nothing to do with talent. And that's what I keep arguing with you Florida folks, man. You Florida folks keep saying, we got a good team, JT. We're way too talented to win anything less than 6 games. You could have made that same argument last year. The problem is your coaching. Go on Billy Napier's Instagram page. He posted a family photo at the beach, and all you see in the comment section is, your play calling's horrible. Give it up. I can't wait for you to get fired. I don't see it with Florida this year, and I also think Billy Napier gets the boot once the season ends. South Carolina, I have them going 7-5, 4-4 in the conference. I think the Gamecocks are in for a bounce-back year. Shane Beamer, his first 2 years down there, greatly overachieved. Everybody thought it was going to be a rebuild when he first got down there, but he turned that thing around pretty fast. Of course, we're not going to forget their crazy end of the season run in 2022 when they upset Tennessee, ended their playoff hopes. Then the following week, they also upset Clemson. But last year, things went haywire because the offensive line was a disaster. They had a bunch of guys go down early. Their defense was pretty good, but offensively, they just didn't have enough juice. This year, you get Rocket Sanders from the transfer portal. You got a young, promising quarterback in Lenore Sellers, who a lot of Gamecock fans are really excited about. You got Nick Harbor, who was a 5-star recruit from the 2023 recruiting cycle. He was a top 15 rated player in that class. This dude is a sane athlete. He was fast enough where he could have potentially qualified to be in the Olympics right now. And this dude is built like a freight, 6'5", 240 pounds. And they are saying that he could be faster than Tyreek Hill. So they got a lot of freaks on that squad going into this season. They got experienced defense. Their coaching staff feels that their front seven is the most talented that it's been in the last couple of years. You're going to have an experienced defense. You're going to have an offense that they may not have a lot of depth and talent at wide receiver, but on the offensive line, if they can just play at an average level, and you get competent quarterback play out of Lenore Sellers, South Carolina, with the easy out-of-conference schedule that they have, they're going to be able to at least get the 4 wins potentially, and then they can find a way to steal a couple of wins. I get that they got some tough games at home, but everybody knows that it's really difficult to win on the road in college football. So they definitely are one of those teams that, under Shane Beamer, like he has showed us in the past, they have the capability of pulling off some major upsets based off what we saw them do the end of 2022. So I got South Carolina going 7-5. LSU, I know a lot of you guys are going to be extremely upset with this prediction, but I got them going 7-5, 4-4 in SEC play. I love their new defensive staff. You got Blake Baker, who was the former defensive coordinator the last couple of years at Missouri. He's going to be calling plays on defense now for them. You got Bo Davis, the best defensive line coach in college football, but they still aren't as talented as what they need to be on that side of football. I know that sounds ridiculous to say because we're talking about LSU. They always recruit at a pretty high level, but in the transfer portal, there were a lot of guys that they were trying to get that they were unable to get, such as the defensive tackle from TCU who ended up picking Oklahoma over them. So they still have some concerns on their interior D-line. The back end of their secondary, I still have major concerns about as well. Offensively, we know that they can score points with the best of them. They got great receivers. Garrett Nussmeier is going to have a fantastic season. They got one of the best offensive lines going into this year. But they're pretty much going to be all offense. And their defense is going to improve, but I don't think you're going to see a major night and day improvement. They are going to be better than what they were last year because that defense in 2023 was the worst that they had in program history. But at best, they have a top 70 defense. until I see more out of that side of the ball, I don't think LSU is going to be a playoff team. And I think there's a strong chance that Brian Kelly has quietly become overrated. When he first came into the SEC, he was a big fish in a big pond, but now he's a big fish in a big pond with a lot of other big fishes, because you got Mike Elko in this conference now. You got Kalen DeBoer in the SEC now. There are way more better coaches now than what they were when Brian Kelly first took the job down there in Baton Rouge. And the thing with Brian Kelly is that he always makes a bunch of excuses. At this point, when are you going to start producing? I think this is going to be a huge down year for LSU in 2024 that they have coming up. Next up, we got Auburn. We're going into year 2 of the freeze era. And I got them going 8-4, which may be a bit surprising to a lot of you guys out there. But Auburn, if they were playing in a different conference like the Big 12 or the SEC, they could be good enough where they could win 9 or 10 games, but the SEC is just so oversaturated with good teams that it's hard to see Auburn being able to break out of that middle of the bunch, because this is a roster that has a lot of young guys that they're going to be dependent on, such as that freshman wide receiver, Kim Coleman, who was a stud coming out of high school. He was going off all throughout spring, but Payton Thorne, he isn't really that impressive. He could improve, but I'm not expecting to see Michigan State Payton Thorne return. And although Hugh Freeze is one of the better offensive minds in the country, there's only so much you can do when you have a limited quarterback. And if you would have had a better quarterback, such as when you were playing Georgia, you possibly could have won that game. Payton Thorne holds this team back a little bit, but with the way their schedule lines up and how much of an advantage it is playing at Jordan-Hare Stadium, I can see them pulling off a couple of upsets and find a way to sneakily get to 8 wins this year. Next up, we got Missouri. I have Mizzou going 8-4 this year. This is one of the most overrated teams going into this season. A good amount of people believe that they're going to get into the playoffs this year. I don't see that. Missouri does have a promising future under Eli Drinkwitz. They are recruiting at a really good level, and they do return a lot of production on offense from last year's unit, but they lost a lot on defense. They lost their defensive coordinator as well. And what people don't talk about enough about Missouri is that for as good as what last year was, there were a few games that they won that they probably should have lost. You know, you had a huge 60-something yard field goal to beat Kansas State. You nearly lost to Florida. They had a few close wins that they had that if the ball would have bounced in a different direction, they would have been losses. Still was a great season, not going to take anything away from that. But this year, people are living off the recency bias. And they haven't recruited at a level to show me that they're going to be able to maintain the level of success they had in 2023 consistently for the next couple of years. Missouri, to me, looks like one of those programs that every 2 or 3 years, they're going to be poised for a big breakout year where they win maybe 9 or 10 plus games. But for the most part, I view this program as a 7-1 team consistently until I can see more consistency out of the recruiting. Texas A&M, I got them at 7-5, 5-3 in conference play. You may be a little puzzled as to why I have them above Missouri, because Missouri has an 8-4 record, but Texas A&M is 7-5. Well, Texas A&M, I think, is going to be better in conference play than what Missouri is going to be. 5-3, I do think that their schedule is pretty favorable until you get to the end of the season when you got to play Texas. Your schedule really starts to ramp up. But Texas A&M does have a lot of upside this year to where they possibly could be a 10-win team, and maybe they could end up playing in the SEC championship, because think about it. If Mike Elko was able to win at Duke, You can win anywhere, especially at a school like A&M where you have access to unlimited resources. They've done a really good job of using the portal. You got a solid quarterback in Connor Wigman coming back, even though he is still fairly unproven. Based off the small sample size that he showed us last year, if he can improve off what he did and the small amount of action that he got last year before his injury, he could be one of the better quarterbacks in college football this year. They got a fantastic group of wide receivers. They got players on offense. The question is, how's that offensive line going to look? Their defense should be really good, and they got a really good defensive staff. I just think with Texas A&M, they're going to start out hot the first half of the season, and then the second half of the year, that's when they're going to start to fall off just a tad bit, and that's why I got them going 7-5, 5-3 in SEC play. Tennessee, I got the Vols going 9-3, 5-3 in conference play. There's a lot to love about the Vols this year. You got Nico Imaviava, who was the second best quarterback coming out of his recruiting class not too long ago. They were flying this dude out on recruiting visits on a private jet. If you're getting flown out on a private jet, you got to be one of those ones. And when I look at Nico Imaviava, I see Trevor Lawrence, but times 100 athleticism. This dude has a really good arm as well. He has the ability to make every single throw. He doesn't have the cannon that Joe Milton had, but he's not too far off. And he had an outstanding debut in their bowl game win against Iowa. And the supporting cast that he has around him is also going to be really good. Remember, a reason for why Tennessee's offense took a step back in 2023 was because they had a good amount of injuries that they dealt with at wide receiver. Bro McCoy got injured. He's back fully healthy. You got Squirrel White who comes back. You got Chris Brazil, who's a transfer from Tulane. He's going to have a big impact. Don't forget about Deontay Thornton, who transferred from Oregon last year. I believe he also got beat up down the stretch due to injuries. So not only are you going to have a talented wide receiving core, but you got a lot of depth down there. So you're going to see a way more efficient passing attack out of Tennessee in 2024 than what we saw last year. And their offensive line is going to be really good too. They returned 3 out of 5 starters on that unit. This defense, though, is not getting talked about enough. When you think about Tennessee, you think about them being a finesse team, and you normally don't think of them being that good defensively. Well, last year, surprisingly, they were one of the more physical teams defensively in the SEC. And imagine me telling you that Tennessee has one of the best defensive lines in college football going into this year. You got James Pierce, who is expected to be a top 3, top 5 pick at next year's draft, along with a lot of other really talented guys on that D-line as well. Their secondary is a concern, but when you run the amount of plays that Tennessee does offensively, your defense is never going to be that good. But Tennessee defensively this year, though, they're going to be good enough where they don't need to have a top 50, top 60 defense. All they need is for their defense to show up in big moments, which they definitely are capable of due to how good they're going to be up front. They're talented. They got tons of depth on the defensive line. Tennessee potentially could be a 10-win team, and they definitely are one of those dark horse contenders to get into the college football playoffs. Kentucky, after Wildcats going 9-3 this year, 5-3 in conference play, some of you guys may be like, JT, what the hell are you doing? Are you high as hell doing this today? I promise you I'm perfectly sober. Y'all are really sleeping on Kentucky this year, man. Everybody says to win in the SEC, you gotta have good trench play. That's what Kentucky's going to have this year. They got an experienced offensive line. They have a fantastic defensive line. A lot of those guys that they have this year on the D-line are going to be playing on Sundays next year. Their secondary is inexperienced, but they have a lot of guys that they're going to be starting this year that, yeah, they are inexperienced, but they were highly touted coming out of high school. This is probably the most talented defense that Kentucky has had from a recruiting standpoint under Mark Stoops. They also got a really good linebacker who transferred from Georgia, and then Brock Vandagriff ends up panning out. I really believe Kentucky could shock us all, and they possibly could make it to the SEC championship this year. They got good receivers. Dane Key, Barry Brown are a really underrated wide receiver duo. And they don't get talked about enough because they didn't get the opportunity to showcase how good they truly were because Devin Leary was such a massive disappointment. But if Brock Vandagriff ends up being a home run that they got out of the transfer portal, this is a really dangerous team. And remember, Kentucky, with the transfer portal, they've had their fair share of hits and misses. Remember, before Devin Leary, they had Will Levis, who was pretty good. He led them to a 10-win season not too long ago. And Kentucky is one of those programs that every once in a while, they come out of nowhere and they pull off a 9-10-win season. This is definitely one of those years that you can see Kentucky have a big year and then they kind of fall off for the next 2 years and they disappear. This is a really talented team that Mark Stoops has coming into 2024. I get that their schedule isn't easy, but with how good they're going to be up front, I believe Brock Vandagriff is going to give them solid quarterback play. And if he ends up delivering on those expectations, look out for the Wildcats this year. I see this being a 9-win team. I got Oklahoma up next. I got the Sooners going 9-3 this year, 5-3 in conference play as well. This is the biggest sleeper team in the SEC approaching this season. Nobody talks about how good Oklahoma's defense is going to be this year. This is going to be one of the best defenses in this conference last year. They were outstanding last year. They were one of the best teams in the nation at forcing takeaways. They got a talented, experienced, and super deep secondary, man. You got guys like Billy Bowman. You got Danny Stutzman at linebacker, who's one of the best defensive players in the SEC this year. Offensively, you got talent there as well. You're loaded at wide receiver. You're going to have Gavin Sawchuk at running back. This dude was going on the tear the last few weeks of last year. Jackson Arnold. He was a top 5 quarterback coming out of that 2023 recruiting class. He was the Elite 11 MVP a while back. And there are some high expectations placed upon his shoulders going into this year because remember, Dylan Gabriel ended up transferring and going to Oregon. People think that Brent Venables just gave Jackson Arnold the job. No, Dylan Gabriel just like, I don't think I'm going to be able to beat out Jackson Arnold, so I might as well just go ahead and go elsewhere. So that shows you just how good Jackson Arnold could be this year. And in that bowl game against Arizona, although they lost that game, he showed a lot of promise. It's just that he was very hot and cold in that game. He started out a little bit cold in the first quarter. Then he started to heat up in the second and third. And then in the fourth quarter, he went back to reverting to being what he was in the first quarter, ice cold. But if he can take better care of the football, he can be a really good quarterback for the Sooners this year, man. Really good athleticism. He has a dynamic arm. He's very good throwing the football when he gets outside the pocket. He can do a lot of improvising when things break down, which is why I'm not too concerned about the offensive line. That's what most Sooner fans are. Dylan Gabriel isn't the athlete that Jackson Arnold is. Jackson Arnold reminds me a lot of what Johnny Manziel was during his playing days at Texas A&M. So look out for the Sooners this year. They're going to have a great defense. Offensively, their offense is going to be good enough to put up points with the best of them because the SEC has a lot of teams that Oklahoma plays this year that have some major concerns defensively. So this is a team that I don't see them winning anything less than 8 games at the worst. At best, they could win the SEC this year. That's how good they are. They've recruited at the top 10 level. They do a really good job of developing players that they recruit out of high school. They've hit the transfer portal and also have filled in some key areas of weakness such as their pass rush and their interior defensive line. This is one of the most complete teams entering the SEC this season, and that's why I have them going 9-3, 5-3 in conference play. Ole Miss is a team on the rise. Last year, they won the most games that they've ever had in program history. Lane Kiffin has done a really good job of building up Ole Miss through the transfer portal and also recruiting. And many people believe that they could be in the SEC championship because they do have a pretty favorable schedule. But I got them going 9-3 because I do see them taking a couple of upset losses, especially some of the road teams that they have to play. But you do get the luxury of playing Georgia at home, even though you do have home field advantage in that game, and you are a more improved team this year than what you were last year when you played Georgia. I still see Georgia winning that game, and I could see them having a couple of upsets there, but I got them going 9-3. They should still be good enough where they potentially could qualify to be in the new expanded playoffs. But I don't know just how improved that defense is going to be. I know that they got a bunch of guys out of the transfer portal. A lot of the transfers that they were bringing in on the defense side of the football were top 100 rated players or better in the portal. But just because you're bringing in all this talent doesn't necessarily mean that it's all going to work out. There are going to be a few guys that they probably whiff on. And Pete Golden, I still don't believe he's a great defensive coordinator. There's a reason why he's at Ole Miss and why he didn't remain at Alabama under Nick Saban. So the jury's still out on him. I see Ole Miss being a little bit better than what they were last year, but still winning games a lot similarly to how they did in 2023. All offense, not really too much defense. Georgia, I have the Bulldogs going 10-2, 6-2 in conference play. Listen, Georgia very well could go undefeated, and they could win the SEC this year. They are probably the most talented team in this conference, but they got a really brutal road schedule this year. You got to go on the road and play Ole Miss, Texas, and Alabama. All three of those teams are good enough to win this conference, and they definitely are going to have the work cut out for them. And I think there's a possibility where you see Georgia losing 2 out of 3 of those matchups. As crazy as that may sound, but Texas, Ole Miss, and Alabama, the gap in talent between those teams compared to Georgia isn't really that wide. Georgia is better, but Ole Miss, Alabama, and Texas, they're not too far off, especially Alabama and Texas. Yes, they did lose Caleb Downs and a couple of other talented players to the portal, but there's still a lot of talent that remained there despite Nick Saban stepping down, retiring. And Kalen DeBoer, we saw what he did in his first 2 years at Washington. So imagine what he can do right out the gate with Nick Saban talent and plus the guys that follow him from Washington. Georgia, I got them going 10-2. They're still going to be a really good team. It's just that, unfortunately, with them having such a tough schedule, that's why I have them going 10-2. And even if they are a better team than what Texas, Ole Miss, and Alabama are, we know that in college football, a lot of upsets occur when you have to go on the road. And that's why I see Georgia having 2 losses, but I still have them as a lock to get into the playoffs. And they definitely are still going to be a factor in the national championship picture. Texas, I also have the Longhorns going 10-2, 6-2 in conference play, but I have them making it to the SEC championship game. Defensively, there are some major concerns. You lose 2 outstanding interior defensive linemen in Tavondre Sweat, and you also lose the other name of him, Byron Murphy. So you lose Byron Murphy and Tavondre Sweat to the NFL. It's going to be really difficult for them to replace those guys. Now, they did hit the transfer portal and brought in a couple of guys via the portal to replace them, but I don't really think the replacements are going to live up to anywhere being... I don't think the replacements for Sweat and Murphy are going to be anywhere as good as what those guys were. And I still believe that from a secondary standpoint, they still may be a little bit inconsistent. Plus, you did lose the best defensive line coach in college football and Bo Davis to LSU. So I think defensively, Texas takes a little bit of a step back. I think offensively, they have the capability to be better than what they were last year. Their offensive line is a top 10 unit going into this year. You're loaded at wide receiver. It just all depends on how better is Quinn Ewers going to be in his final season down there compared to what we've seen out of him the last couple of years in Texas. He isn't bad. It's just that he's been a little inconsistent, and he can get rattled at times and get out to a slow start, as we saw in their semifinal loss to Washington. So I got them going 10-2, making it to the SEC championship game. And the team I have finishing with the best record in this conference this year, it's the Alabama Crimson Tide, baby. I know that Nick Saban retiring definitely has people doubting Alabama this year, and for a really good reason. We know that Nick Saban is the greatest head coach in college football history, and losing him definitely is a significant loss. But you replaced him with the best possible replacement in Kalen DeBoer. And I believe Kalen DeBoer is going to be the second coming of Nick Saban. Everywhere Kalen DeBoer has been, he's won, and he's done it at a high level. When he was winning NAIA national championships at his alma mater, he never really lost too many games there. He was successful at Fresno State. He did a really good job the 2 years down at Washington, turned that team from being nearly irrelevant to becoming a national championship contender in the span of 2 years. And he only had 3 losses during that span, including smacking Dan Lanning in Oregon twice. And a lot of people hold Dan Lanning in very high regard. So if he can do what he did at Washington in 2 years, imagine what he can do at Alabama, still having a lot of talent that Nick Saban recruited. And you do have Jalen Milroe. Jalen Milroe is going to be a fantastic fit and Kalen DeBoer's system, because Kalen DeBoer, well, he had a lot of success calling plays for Michael Penix at Washington last year, was in the vertical passing game. And Alabama with Jalen Milroe, he throws the deep ball more accurately than he throws short and intermediate passes. So you're going to see Jalen Milroe improve tremendously under Kalen DeBoer. And I see Alabama not just making it to the SEC championship game this year, but I also am picking them to win that SEC this year also, year one under Kalen DeBoer. This dude is a stud. I get that there are some people that are skeptical about how good Alabama's going to be under him in his first season, because they are replacing Nick Saban, and there is a lot of pressure that comes with taking over for a coach that has this much history, especially when they're going to be naming the field after him. But I don't think there was a better replacement for Nick Saban than Kalen DeBoer. He has a great track record. Everywhere he's been, he's won, and he's done it fairly fast. And with Alabama still having a top 5 roster, they pretty much still have the second or third most talented team in this conference. And a lot of their tougher games, they get to play in Tuscaloosa. And Alabama has only lost a handful of games at home. So these are my SEC record predictions for the upcoming 2024-2025 college football season. Leave your record predictions down in the comment section down below. I'm pretty sure all of you guys are going to agree with me. And before we move on, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. Remember to turn on post notifications. We upload college football content, NFL content on the daily. You don't want to miss when we go live as well. And training camp is in full swing right now, which means the NFL season is just around the corner. So you definitely want to make sure that you are subscribed and you have post notifications turned on so you don't miss when we drop new content. Remember, we are not just a YouTube channel, man. If you like listening to podcasts on your way to work or while you're at work to pass time, check us out on Apple and Spotify, JT Sports Podcast. Or you can go to the link down in the description down below. There will be the links to the Apple and Spotify versions of the pod. Give us a 5-star review if you enjoy. And I mean, listen, don't just give us a 5-star review on your phone. If you want a reason to check your girlfriend's phone, you trying to see what she's up to, if you're trying to see if she's being loyal, be like, hey, babe, like, can I see your phone real quick? And when she asks you why, just be like, man, I got to go give my boy JT a 5-star review on this podcast. And while you're doing it, you got a little bit of an excuse to be a little bit nosy. Also, if you got a question that you would like answered on a future episode, you can send them in the DMs on Instagram at JT_Sports_ and on X at JT___. Now, real quick, before we move on, I got to get me a quick sip of water real quick. So give me like 30 seconds. Don't go anywhere. Shout out to everybody in the chat, man. Shout out to my guy, Papi Guapo TV. He says, yo, stay home. Shout out to my guy, Kai Fikes. He says, we have to take into consideration that the SEC won't have division, so top 2 teams play in the SEC title game. My guy, Kate Rowan, says, I'm sleeping on Kentucky, too. I'm not going to lie, but I believe you. That'll be fun this season. I might put the Sooners even higher than that. I expect they'll be very competitive. Shout out to everybody in the chat, man. And let's move back to the NFL. Most people this year believe the Carolina Panthers are going to be one of the worst teams in the NFL this year. But to me, this is the NFL's biggest sleeper team this year. The reason why they were so awful last year was because the coaching was complete trash. They gave Bryce Young an awful supporting cast. With the hiring of Dave Canales, you're going to have somebody who was responsible for the resurrection of Baker Mayfield and Geno Smith. So at this moment, Bryce Young is in a similar situation to what Tua Tagovailoa was when the Dolphins decided to fire Brian Flores and bring in Mike McDaniel. You're going to have a guy in Dave Canales that's going to be able to speak to Bryce Young, who's going to put him in a better system to maximize what he did so well coming out of Alabama, which was a large reason why they went out and they got a guy like Deontay Johnson. Because with Dave Canales running a quarterback-friendly offense that's going to be based off getting the ball out fast, short intermediate passes, you need a wide receiver that can not only get off the line, but can run great routes and create a lot of separation. That's what you're going to get out of Deontay Johnson. You also have Xavier Legette, who could have a really good rookie season. You had a really good draft class. You improved the interior of your offensive line. And their defense, yeah, there's not a lot of guys that you look at on paper that give you a lot of confidence. This is going to be a good defensive unit, especially with them losing Frankie Louisville, trading away Brian Burns. But Ejiro Evero is one of the better defensive coordinators in the NFL. I still expect Carolina to have a top 15 defense this year. They're playing in a weak division. The NFC South, the Saints aren't going to be that good. Dennis Allen could potentially get fired. Todd Bowles and the Buccaneers, they've overachieved the last 2 years. I think that their luck is going to run out this year. They're going to take a step back with them losing Dave Canales. And then the Atlanta Falcons, yes, they are more talented than the Carolina Panthers, but I don't trust Raheem Morris as much as I trust Dave Canales. We already seen Raheem Morris be a head coach in the past with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and it didn't work out. Now, could he be better his second go-around than what he was his first go-around? Of course, but I just love Carolina because they're really under the radar. They got a really favorable schedule. They only play 3 teams that made the playoffs last year. The rest of the teams that they played weren't playoff caliber. And they have the ability to win anywhere between 8 to 10 games this year with how easy this division is going to be. If you end up getting improved quarterback play out of Bryce Young, which you should, if Dave Canales can get the best out of Geno Smith, who was nothing but a good backup at best, then imagine what he's going to do with Bryce Young. There's a reason why Bryce went number 1 overall. It's because he throws with great anticipation. He has really good accuracy, throwing in between the numbers. I really believe Bryce Young's rookie season was compromised because of the poor supporting cast that Carolina had, the awful coaching that they had. Now, with Dave Canales, somebody that knows way more than what he's doing compared to Frank Wright, you're going to see Bryce Young in a situation that's going to bring the best out of him, similar to Trevor Lawrence. Remember, his rookie season was a major disappointment because how bad Urban Meyer was. This dude, after losses, was going out and clubbing, messing around with strippers and dancers. You got a guy in Dave Canales that everywhere he's been a major part in helping guide the resurgence of 2 of the biggest insanity runs in the NFL over the last couple of years. So if he can help Geno Smith and Baker Mayfield resurrect their careers, I believe he is the best coach that Carolina could have hired for Bryce Young. I get that their owner is a little bit of a lunatic. He's been going Looney Tunes as of late. You know, he threw water on the fan during a Jags game, I believe. He has the tendency to dip his hand in the cookie jar more than he should. But I really believe that Carolina is good enough to win the NFC South this year. I get that they're not a dependable team in terms of, you know, all the dysfunction that they have going on from a front office standpoint. But you can say the same thing with the other 3 teams in this division as well. I mean, the Atlanta Falcons needed an edge rusher. They ended up drafting Michael Penix with the 8th overall pick, despite them signing Kirk Cousins in free agency. So, I mean, let's not just act like the Carolina Panthers are the only team in this division that has a questionable front office when the Atlanta Falcons are in that same conversation. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Todd Bowles is not a good coach. Neither is Dennis Allen. I trust Dave Canales more than I trust the other 3 coaches in this division. I get that he hasn't showed us anything as a head coach, but at least from an offensive standpoint, if you can resurrect Geno Smith and Baker Mayfield, you mean to tell me that you can't get the best out of Bryce Young? I mean, that is a very good resume. Because we saw Geno Smith regress last year a little bit, and Baker Mayfield, he's always been really up and down throughout his career. And you're definitely going to see the loss of Dave Canales have a big impact on Tampa Bay negatively. I'm looking at Dave Canales as a potential candidate to win Coach of the Year this year. Carolina is being severely underestimated. They got very low odds to make it to the playoffs, and I get it. Their team, from a talent standpoint, they don't really give you a lot to be hopeful for, especially if you're a Panthers fan. But this is one of those years where I really believe that Carolina is going to surprise everybody, man, because they do have an improved team offensively, and hiring Dave Canales is going to do wonders for Bryce Young. I'm expecting a big year 2 jump out of Bryce. I think you definitely are about to see the arrival of King Bryce this season, and this is going to be a 10-win team. They don't have a hard schedule. A lot of their games are fairly winnable. There's not a single game that you can go through on Carolina's schedule up until the latter half of the season where you say, okay, they don't got a chance to win that. But outside of them playing Kansas City and a couple of other good teams and the second half of this year, a lot of their games can go either way. Because you're playing 11 teams that didn't qualify for the postseason last year, along with Carolina. So if Dave Canales is able to do with Bryce Young what we saw him do with Geno Smith and Baker Mayfield, Carolina most definitely can win the NFC South. And that's why I have this being a 10-win team, and I'm picking them to win this division this year. You may call me crazy. You can look in my eyes. You don't see them red. You don't see them being, a little bit shut close. So that tells you that I'm sober. I haven't been smoking. I really mean this. I'm not trolling. I'm not joking. I'm picking the Carolina Panthers to win the NFC South, man. I believe in Bryce Young and Dave Canales. I don't really care about the lack of talent that they have at other areas on defense, because Ejaro Evero has showed us that he's probably the most underrated defensive coordinator in the game. Everywhere he's been, his defenses have always been pretty solid. So Carolina is going to be my pick to win the NFC South this year. Man, I don't know about the New York Jets this year. I got them winning 10 games and going to the playoffs, but I don't really feel too confident about it, man. You got the weird situation going on with Hassan Reddick. Nathaniel Hackett, pretty much just a doofus as an offensive coordinator. The only reason that the Jets are going to be a playoff team this year is because of Aaron Rodgers. And New York is one of those teams that either you think they're going to be an absolute clown show this year, or you actually believe that they're good enough to get to the postseason because Aaron Rodgers is still the bad man that we saw all those years playing for the Green Bay Packers. I'll take the second option. I still believe in Aaron Rodgers, even though he is driving me a little bit insane with what he's been doing throughout the offseason. You know, missing out on mandatory minicamp to go do ayahuasca definitely rubbed me the wrong way, but this is Aaron Rodgers, people. I get that there are some concerns about how good is he coming off a major injury. Plus, he had a down season prior to that injury taking place last year. He still has a lot to prove, but he's one of the greatest quarterbacks to ever play this game. And anytime you have a Hall of Fame caliber player, they tend to always bounce back anytime you count them out. Remember, Phillip Rivers, when he went to the Indianapolis Colts, people didn't think he was going to be that good, and he led them to the playoffs that year. Aaron Rodgers still has a little bit of juice left in the tank where the Jets can be a postseason team this year. Are they going to do anything else once they get to the playoffs? I don't really see them winning more than maybe a playoff game. Maybe they get to the divisional round, they put up a fight, but at best, this is going to be a wild card team. Okay, they do have a really good roster. They're going to have elite defense. We know that Robert Saleh, for as many questions as we have about him being a good coach, we at least know that his defenses have always been amongst the best in the league, and that shouldn't change this year. Offensively, you improved the offensive line. You added Mike Williams at wide receiver. You also have Malachi Corley, who you drafted out of Western Kentucky, who many draft analysts loved. So there is a lot of talent on this unit, including Bryce Hall, who people see as a top 5, top 8 back in the league right now. When Breece Hall, I have him on a lot of my fantasy squads. Garrett Wilson, we know that he's a stud as well. There's enough talent in place for the Jets to make it to the playoffs. Their schedule isn't that difficult, in my opinion. Yes, they do have a tough opener against the 49ers, and for the first 4 games, things are going to be a little bit rocky, but I think overall, their schedule is pretty favorable, and they're playing in a division where you get to play the Miami Dolphins twice. I definitely believe that you can split that, and you have to play the Buffalo Bills. You can win a game against Buffalo, and you should sweep the floor with New England this year. I have some concerns about the New York Jets, but I still have faith that Aaron Rodgers is still going to be playing at a top 10 level. And think about all the games that they lost last year, right? When they lost to Kansas City, they would have won that game if they had Aaron Rodgers. Zach Wilson played the best game of his career, and they lost that game because despite how well he played, he gave the ball away in the fourth quarter, which ultimately led to Kansas City getting that W. Same thing against the New England Patriots the first time they played and they lost to them. They would have won that game if they had Aaron Rodgers. And they definitely would have beaten the Las Vegas Raiders and the Atlanta Falcons if Aaron Rodgers was healthy and he suited up for those games as well. They would have been an 11-win team with Aaron Rodgers fully healthy in 2023. This year, I still see that being the case. It's hard for me to count out Aaron Rodgers considering his greatness, how good he's been for the majority of his career, and I just see his career ending on a high note. Probably not with a Super Bowl, but at least with him being able to lead the Jets to the postseason and giving Jets fans a season that they can be happy about, because they haven't been to the playoffs ever since the early days of the 2010s when they had Rex Ryan as their head coach. So I still have faith in Aaron Rodgers. I'm really hesitant to put a lot of faith in this team, but it's just, I don't know, man. I just can't count out Aaron Rodgers. I just can't. I don't care about the Achilles injury. I don't care about the age. This is Aaron Rodgers, one of the greatest quarterbacks that we've seen. Am I a little bit biased because he is a big part of my childhood? Yes, I am. But if there's any quarterback that I'm going to give the benefit of a doubt to, it's going to be Aaron Rodgers. I get that he's been going a little bit off the wall in the offseason, but he's always kind of been a little bit weird. But that's Aaron Rodgers, people. That's why we all love him. I'm not going to count out Aaron Rodgers. The Jets got a lot of dysfunction going on. Robert Saleh and their owner were getting into it. I don't really care about all that. They got Aaron Rodgers. I believe in him. The rest of the team has a lot of faith in him. And as long as he can stay healthy, this is going to be a playoff team. When Bo Nix was drafted by the Denver Broncos in the first round this year, I was really surprised to see the amount of pushback the Broncos received for that pick, because Bo Nix going to play under Sean Payton was a match made in heaven. You want to know why? Because what does Sean Payton want out of his quarterbacks? He wants them to get the ball out fast, make smart decisions with the football. That's what Bo Nix did really well at Oregon. He had a really low interception number. He had a lot of plays that he made when he was getting outside the pocket, extending plays, buying time for guys to get open. But mainly, he played well within structure. Something that Russell Wilson didn't do too good of a job of last year, and that's why Denver kicked him to the curb. Bo Nix potentially could end up winning Rookie of the Year, and I think that he has the second best chance to do so, right behind Caleb Williams, because he's going to be coached by Sean Payton. Every quarterback that Sean Payton gets his hands on somewhat turns to gold. We seem to forget that his final season in New Orleans, he was 5-1 at one point with Jameis Winston on top of the NFC South, until Jameis Winston had his season cut short due to a season-ending injury that he suffered against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And even then, the Saints still nearly missed out on the playoffs when they went 9-8 with several different quarterbacks. So if Sean Payton can win with Taysom Hill, Trevor Siemian, and Jameis Winston, I'm pretty sure he can develop Bo Nix and turn this dude into a stud. People are really overlooking Bo Nix this year because they didn't like him as a prospect out of Oregon because, you know, he got that check down machine label put on him where he's known as a check down Charlie. But it's like, how can you fault a guy for taking what the defense gives them? And this dude was a winner at Oregon. This dude had one of the greatest career turnarounds that we've ever seen in college football history. This dude went from being an average quarterback at Auburn to one of the best quarterbacks in the nation during the years that he spent at Oregon under Dan Lanning. This dude is a gamer. He has a lot of athleticism in his game as well, which is going to add a different dimension to the Broncos playbook that they didn't have under Russell Wilson. And there's just so much more creativity that Sean Payton can have with Bo Nix as compared to Russell Wilson. When you get Russell Wilson, you have to run the Russell Wilson offense, which in 2024 doesn't lead to you having a lot of success. And what has me so upset about the Broncos getting rid of Russell Wilson is that now that garbage plays for my favorite team. I would much rather have had Bo Nix playing for the Steelers this year rather than have Russell Wilson. So for Denver, to get Bo Nix, I think was a fantastic pickup for them. And they're going to be a lot better than what people think. Most people have them winning either 5, maybe 4 games. But this is a 7-win team for me. I know the defense wasn't that great, but things did get better as the season progressed. They were really good at forcing key takeaways. Bo Nix, as long as he plays within the structure of the offense, he's going to be fine. Sean Payton is the definition of what it means to be a quarterback whisperer. He was able to win with Teddy Bridgewater a few years back when Drew Brees got injured, and people didn't know if Teddy Bridgewater was ever going to play in the NFL again. He helped Teddy Bridgewater get paid. So Sean Payton, if there was ever a reason to be confident about Bo Nix, Sean Payton is the reason. It's not always about how good the quarterback is. Sometimes it's about the situation that certain quarterbacks go to that can help them exceed expectations. Everybody keeps talking about Bo Nix doesn't have a high ceiling. At best, he could be a top 12 quarterback. Who gives a damn about the ceiling? When you're getting coached by one of the greatest offensive minds ever, there is no such thing as a ceiling because he's going to be really good in this system. He's going to get the ball out fast. He's going to take care of the football. He has enough athleticism where you can run design quarterback runs with him, zone reads. There's going to be way more reasons to be terrified of the Broncos offensively this year than what they were last year under Russell Wilson, where they ran a really simplistic offense because Russ was so limited in terms of the things that he's able to do at this age. Bo Nix is going to have an insanely good rookie season under Sean Payton, man. I can't believe the amount of people that are sleeping on Bo Nix going into this year. This dude was a gamer at Oregon. He has a really good arm. He's a great athlete. With Sean Payton, Bo Nix is going to cook in his rookie season with the Denver Broncos. So my realistic expectations for him is that he's going to have 3,700 yards passing, probably 27 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. He's going to complete somewhere in between 64 and 66% of his passes. That's what I'm expecting out of Bo Nix year one in the NFL. Colorado is being heavily underrated going into this year. Their over-under win total is 5.5, and many people are taking the under. And I think if you're betting against Colorado this year in Coach Prime, you're just throwing money in the trash because they're going to prove all of you guys wrong. The Big 12 is not that good of a conference as what you guys think, man. Arizona lost their head coach to Washington. Oklahoma and Texas are gone. Nobody in that conference even recruits consistently at a top 25 level. Colorado, from a talent standpoint, is the best team in the Big 12 entering this year. They got two of the best players in college football on their roster, and Travis Hunter and Shedeur Sanders. With those two guys alone, they're at least going to win 3-4 games right off the bat. And then you improve the interior of their offensive line. You bring in Jordan Seaton and a couple of former starters at other schools via the portal. You did the same with the defensive line. Deion told y'all that he was only a few dogs away from Colorado being where they want to be. Now this is the perfect time for Colorado to make their big run. Year 2 under Coach Prime, I'm expecting this to be a team that not only wins the Big 12 conference, but they make it to the college football playoffs. A lot of y'all think I'm insane for believing that, but this is a way better team than what you guys think. You see, what you guys are making the mistake of doing is judging Colorado based off what they did last year. This is not last year's team. This is a way better team. My bad, we had an Amber Alert. Go ahead, cut that out. But Colorado, from a defensive standpoint, they're going to be way better at getting after the quarterback. They're going to be better against the run this year. And with them having a improved pass rush, that's also going to help out their secondary. They also have a new defensive coordinator who has an NFL background. He comes from that Lou Anarumo coaching tree, and Lou Anarumo is one of the better defensive minds in the league right now. So you bring him to Colorado, I think he's going to have a major impact on that defense improving. And offensively, this is going to be one of the most explosive offenses in the nation. Shedeur Sanders, you saw the stat line that he put up behind that porous offensive line. Imagine how good he's going to be this year if this offensive line is at least average or better. not only are you going to be throwing to Travis Hunter, but you have LaJohntay Western, a transfer from FAU, who I had the honor of watching in person. This dude is a stud. Great route runner, creates fantastic separation on his routes. You also got a really good wide receiver from Vanderbilt. They're talented at that wide receiver position. They got a lot of depth there. You got Dallin Hayden from Ohio State. So you're going to be able to run the football more effectively than what you did last year. Keep making the mistake of thinking that this is the same Colorado team that you saw in 2023 and bet your hard-earned cash against them if you want to. You're going to lose it, because betting against Colorado to win less than 5 games is an easy way to just give away money. If you're just going to take the under with Colorado this year, you might as well just go ahead and donate that money to the channel, because you don't care and you're just donating it to charity. You got to stop looking at Colorado for what they were year one under Coach Prime. Like, Coach Prime and those boys knew that they weren't going to be that good that year. They were just trying to put something together and trying to make the best with what they could do. But this year, though, they were able to go out and improve in several key areas up front. The defensive line, the offensive line. And going into the Big 12, you're not playing any team remotely as good as what Oregon was last year. The best team that Colorado plays is Utah. They're really well coached. Kyle Whittingham is an incredible coach, but I believe that Colorado is going to be able to beat them in the Big 12 championship potentially, or whoever else they could see in the conference championship game. This team offensively is going to score a lot of points, and they're going to do it in bunches. Defensively, all they need to do is get key stops in big moments, and they definitely are more than capable of being able to do that. Betting against Colorado in 2024 is a huge mistake. If you think they're going to win less than 5 games, you're incredibly foolish, because you need to look at what this team brought in the transfer portal and look at how improved this team is going into this season compared to last season. And even last year, they were a lot better than what their record indicated. You're not always what your record says you are. They were a 4-win team, but there were a lot of losses that they had that were decided by one possession. They lost to Arizona, being up 10 points going into the fourth quarter. And we all saw how they fell apart, and that lost to Stanford in overtime when they were up by like 29 points at one point during that game. If they were able to finish those games like how they should, they would have been a 6-win team or better last year, and they would have gone bowling. This year, you're about to see a way more improved Colorado squad year 2 under Coach Prime. Keep sleeping on the Buffs all you want to. Bet against them all you want to. You're throwing money in the trash pretty much, because Colorado is about to shock college football this year. I'm trying to tell you guys, the Buffs ain't coming no more. They're here, and they're about to kick the mother effing door down. Dion ain't go all the way to Boulder to just win some 5 games. They legitimately believe that not only they can compete for the Big 12 this year, but they can also make it into the college football playoffs. When you have Travis Hunter and Shedeur Sanders, those guys are the equivalent to having 3 wins. And with everything else that they're going to have around those 2 guys, with how weak the Big 12 is going to be this year, I really am confident that Colorado is going to win this conference, and they're going to shut up a lot of the haters, and they're going to make you guys look really foolish, especially the people that you're going to be having a really dumb look on your face when you end up losing money betting up against them, because there were people who were taking them to lose and blowout fashion at TCU last year, and you saw where that got you, and their schedule is not that difficult. I saw on the Bleacher Report app earlier the day before I went live, how many games do you see the Buffs winning? And people were like, it's hard for me to see them winning 2 games. What do you mean? There's not a single game on that schedule that Colorado can't win. You guys act like they're playing Alabama and Georgia this year every game in the Big 12. The Big 12 is the weakest Power 4 conference in the sport. Like, nobody in that conference is going to be that good. Outside of Utah, everybody else is pretty much on the same level as what Colorado is. Before we move on, shout out to everybody in the chat, man. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Give us a 5-star review. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you get your podcast from. The JT Sports Podcast is available. Go ahead, follow us on Instagram at JT Sports _ and on X at JT Sports _ and DM us with your NFL and college football questions to be featured on our next mailbag episode that we're going to be doing this weekend. Now, Cleveland.com released their preseason Big Ten poll, and Ohio State received 21 out of 27 of the first place votes. And for the last couple of years, Ohio State has been a preseason favorite to win this conference. And because of them being unable to live up to those expectations the last couple of years, there are a good amount of people out there who are viewing Ohio State as being overrated, which is definitely understandable. But if there was ever a year for Ryan Day and the Buckeyes to go all the way, win this conference, win the national championship, it's this year. This is one of the greatest rosters that Ohio State has ever had in program history. Urban Meyer has praised how good this team is, and there's been a lot of people in the national media also saying how stout this team is. Jim Knowles and that defense were lights out in 2023. They got a lot of those guys from last year returning, such as JTT, who had an outstanding performance against Penn State. Then you add Caleb Downs from the transfer portal, and offensively, I mean, you add Chip Kelly to be your offensive coordinator. Do you not know how dangerous Ohio State's offense is going to be with Chip Kelly at the helm calling plays? The problem with Chip Kelly has never been his play calling. It's been his inability to recruit at a high level. He doesn't have to worry about that at Ohio State. He's just walking in there only having to call plays with a bag of riches. They're loaded at wide receiver. They pretty much are the new wide receiver you in college football. They're going to have an improved offensive line because you're reuniting Chip Kelly with his former offensive line coach. And then what has me so excited about Ohio State this year and why I believe they can win it all is because I don't see anybody stopping their rushing attack this year. You got two of the best running backs in college football on the same team, Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson. That should have never been allowed to happen. Do you guys not understand how dominant Ohio State's rushing attack is going to be this year? If you thought that Michigan's run game was something else, wait until you see what Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins are about to do this year. And I get that for as much criticism that Ryan Day receives for losing to Michigan 3 straight years in a row, let's not act like this dude still isn't a fantastic football coach. He has less than 10 wins on his resume. He hasn't had any more than 2 losses in the season. If 2 losses is your standard for having a disappointing season, you're a hell of a head coach. He recruits at an insanely high level, and the only team this year in the Big Ten that rivals Ohio State somewhat in the talent capacity is Oregon. And Oregon, ironically enough, is ranked behind Ohio State in this poll, along with Penn State at 3 and Michigan at 4 and Iowa and USC following them. I love Ohio State's chances to win the Big Ten this year, and I really don't see how they don't. Outside of them maybe losing to Oregon the first time they played, I don't see them getting swept in the season series if they have to see Oregon for a second time in the Big Ten Conference Championship game. This is a team that is loaded on offense and defense. Defensively, we know that this is going to be a still elite unit with Jim Knowles calling the plays. And we know that offensively, that they have more than enough talent to be way better than what they were last year. Their offense was really boring to watch at certain moments last year. And with Honda McCord, there were games that you just looked at him and you just said, yeah, man, like Ohio State couldn't do better than you at QB. Will Howard, people are kind of giving him that same treatment that people gave Kyle McCord, but he's a lot better than what people give him credit for. First of all, the dude was not splitting snaps with Avery Johnson. I get that there were times when him and Avery Johnson were rotating during games, but I wouldn't call it 50-50. It was more so 80-20 because Will Howard was still in for the majority of those games. And Chip Kelly has done a pretty good job of developing quarterbacks. Outside of what happened with Dante Moore last year, he got Dorian Thompson-Robinson to the league. And he also has done a really good job with the talent that he had at running back at UCLA, getting the most out of those guys. Chip Kelly is one of those offensive minds that he can either have a finesse offense or he can have an offense that's based off physicality and having a run-first mentality. So it's pretty much pick your poison. Nobody really knows what to expect out of Ohio State's offense outside of the fact that they're just stacked at every position. I'm not concerned about their offensive line. Their offensive line has been a weakness for the last 2 years. But people, this is Ohio State. A school like Ohio State can't have a weakness at a certain position for too long because they just recruit at too high of a level to do so. They got like several 5- and 4-star offensive linemen on that team. That offensive line is bound to improve at some point, and this is the year. The Big Ten is not that good. Everybody keeps making this conference out to be something that it's not. They are nowhere close to being as good as what the SEC is. Penn State, they don't have an offense that gives me a lot of confidence because they don't have proven wide receivers. Their offensive line is decent, and they got some really good running backs, and Drew Aller's really good. But from a wide receiver standpoint, I think that they're severely lacking in that area, and that's going to come back to bite them in the butt. Defensively, we know they're still going to be really good, but Ohio State owns James Franklin. USC, I love USC, but there's no chance in hell that USC has at being able to take down Ohio State or even Oregon this year. Ohio State is probably playing in a Big Ten conference that is as weak as what it's ever been. And the reason why I call the Big Ten weak is not because this conference doesn't have good teams, but there's not a lot of elite teams in the Big Ten this year. There's probably only about 2, maybe 3 elite teams in the Big Ten. In the SEC, there's about 5, 6, 7 teams that could be elite this year. Outside of Oregon, there's nobody else that can really rival Ohio State from a talent standpoint. And when they play Michigan this year, they should curb stomp Michigan. I'm expecting Michigan to get blown the hell out by Ohio State. Ryan Day's biggest problem was Jim Harbaugh. He's gone. Michigan loses a lot of production from last year, and I don't care about how many guys they have coming back that got significant playing time. You only return, 4 starters on defense and only a handful on offense. You don't recruit at as high as a level to just say that you don't have to rebuild, you just reload. You're not Georgia or Alabama. Those schools don't have to rebuild. They just reload. Michigan isn't one of those schools. They don't recruit at that level. Ohio State, with them having the significant talent advantage over Michigan and a way better coaching staff than what Michigan has, I expect them to turn the tables in this rivalry. And I expect Ohio State to have nothing more than at least 1 loss. If they have 2 losses in the regular season this year, I would be incredibly surprised. And if they don't win the Big Ten, this is definitely going to be a huge disappointment of a year for Ryan Day and company up there because this is their best chance to win it all this year. You're going into a Big Ten conference that is fairly weak as opposed to what it's been in previous years. Yeah, you got more quality teams, but let's be honest, a Wisconsin, a Nebraska, they're not going to be able to hang with you for 60 minutes, and neither should Michigan. So if you're Ohio State, the only legit competition that you have this year is Oregon. And I believe you can beat them. If not once, twice. if you have to see him again in the Big Ten Conference Championship game. So I'm all in on Ohio State this year. I don't think that they're overhyped. I believe that the hype is definitely justified with the talent that they have, how loaded they are at every position, them having the best coaching staff in college football. You have Jim Knowles coaching your defense and Chip Kelly calling plays for you offensively. It doesn't get any better than that. These are two of the best coordinators at their respective positions. So anything less than a national championship berth for Ohio State would surprise me, man, because this team is really stacked and they're really good. And I believe that for the first time in a while, Ohio State actually is going to live up to their preseason ranking, being the number 110 going into the Big Ten Conference this year. And before we end this episode, there's one more team in the Big Ten I got to talk about this year, man. I feel like I'm one of the few people in the world that still believe that USC is going to have a good season this year. We seem to forget that Lincoln Riley's first year coaching the Trojans, they won 11 games as opposed to their... Start that over, man. I ain't like how I started that. I feel like I'm one of the few people in the world that still believe that USC is going to have a good season this year. People seem to forget that Lincoln Riley, his first year at USC, he won 11 games. You know how many games USC won before Lincoln Riley got there? Only 4. And yet the dude has one down year, and you got people calling for his job, predicting him to get fired. Let me tell you guys something. Lincoln Riley has been to the college football playoffs several times throughout his coaching career. He won the Big 12 Conference several times. He's got numerous quarterbacks drafted high in the NFL. You talk about QBU, Lincoln Riley is QBU. Any quarterback that he gets automatically turns into a first-round pick. So therefore, offensively, you shouldn't be doubting USC just because they're transitioning into the Big Ten. The Big Ten doesn't know what a good offense looks like outside of Ohio State. Penn State's offense wasn't that good last year. Iowa made it to the Big Ten title game with their defense scoring more points than their damn offense. The biggest question for USC this year is their defense. But they hired D'Anton Lynn to take over as their defensive coordinator. And I get that USC doesn't have the talent that they need to have defensively entering the Big Ten to win this conference. But in his lone season at UCLA, they went from being one of the worst defenses in college football to being a top 10 defense in only the span of 1 year under D'Anton Lynn. And it's not like UCLA had a bunch of studs on defense and they were recruiting at a high level. He has way more talent to work with year one at USC than what he had at UCLA. And I don't think it's far-fetched to expect for the Trojans defense to improve to being a top 50 unit this year one under D'Anton Lynn. I get that for certain defensive coordinators like Jim Knowles, when he first got to Ohio State, the defense wasn't good right out the gate. But for D'Anton Lynn, though, there are problems that USC had defensively that he's just going to fix that has nothing to do with talent and had everything to do with coaching. USC was really small. Alex Grinch, his mentality defensively was that we want to be light and fast because we want to treat every play like the blitz. D'Anton Lynn wants his defenses to be big and tough up front, which is why USC has been prioritizing for all their players to make significant gains in the weight room. And if they don't reach the expected weight gain, they get punished for it. So you're going to see a bigger, more physical team up front from this USC defense. You're going to see a defense that's not going to have as many covers bust and missed tackles as what they had under Alex Grinch, because they're going to be better coached. They're going to have better communication. And offensively, on the offensive line, they're going to get that figured out. Lincoln Riley has had just as many offensive linemen drafted into the league, such as Creed Humphrey, Cody Ford, as he's had quarterbacks. There are major misconceptions I believe many of you guys have who are doubting USC. You're overlooking the changes that Lincoln Riley has made to this program. After they lost to Washington, him and a lot of those players acknowledged that they got to make changes, and they've made them. Now, Rome wasn't built overnight. And yes, not all of these changes are going to result in USC making a huge jump and improvement this year, but I'm not picking USC to be a national championship contender. Hell, I'm not picking them to win the Big Ten. But what I am saying is that they're more likely to win 9 games this year than they are to barely finish above 500. There's no chance in hell USC only wins 6-7 games this year. The best teams that they played this year, like Penn State, are easily beatable in my opinion. James Franklin is one of the biggest frauds in this sport because he struggles to win big games. Lincoln Riley has won tons of big games in the past, and he also has a winning record against Big Ten teams, if I'm not mistaken. USC has enough talent in place where they can be a 9, potentially 10-win team this year. Their schedule, yeah, they got to play Notre Dame. You got to play Penn State. You start week 1 off playing against LSU. But there's not a single game that USC is going to play this year during the regular season that you look at and you can say they don't have a shot in hell of being able to beat that team. Because offensively, they can put points up in bunches. And yes, they are going to have to adjust to the Big Ten. But the Big Ten is also going to have to adjust to USC. The Big Ten doesn't see receivers like Zachariah Branch every day. I don't think they're going to be able to defend the kind of speed that Zachariah Branch has. He's like the equivalent to Tavon Austin and DeAnthony Thomas put together just playing wide receiver. And a lot of their wide receivers that they're going to be starting this year were 4 or 5-star guys coming out of high school and top 100 recruits in the respective classes. You guys are severely overlooking Lincoln Riley's resume. Just because the dude had the worst season of his career doesn't mean that he's a bad head coach and that the sky is falling for USC. The narrative that has been thrown around when it comes to USC is that they're a West Coast team. They're not going to be able to match the physicality of the Big Ten because they're soft Cali boys. How are they going to be when they got to go on the road and play against a tough team like Michigan? You know, that's hard-nosed up front from the middle portion of the country. Let me tell you something. Y'all don't know about those Samoans that USC has, okay? Like, y'all got to stop with these stereotypes. Because at one point, people used to be scared to play USC when Pete Carroll was their head coach. You know, Oregon, they're a West Coast team, and yet they're picked to make it to the Big Ten championship game by most people out there. So if Oregon can be as good as what people expect, why not USC? You see, I get that USC hasn't recruited as well as what they need to, but this team is good enough that they can take advantage of a Big Ten that's being incredibly overhyped. Y'all make it seem like the Big Ten has a bunch of great teams in it when it's not. This has only been a 3-team conference for the last 4 or 5 years. Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State have been the only 3 programs that have mattered in this conference. USC is way better than what you guys think. And I believe this year, USC wins at least 9, maybe 10 games possibly this year. I get that everybody is pretty low on them due to their NIL struggles, the recruiting struggles, how bad their defense was last year, but we can't ignore the changes that Lincoln Riley has made. Not just to his coaching staff, but from a philosophical standpoint. Putting more emphasis on the weight room. Putting more emphasis on having physical practices. These are going to pay off once the season gets here. And I can't wait for USC to give the Big Ten a reality check because I'm so tired of the Big Ten fanboys out there making it seem like this conference is something that they're not. You're not the SEC. You're always going to be second fiddle to the Southeastern Conference because you never have the same amount of elite teams as compared to what the SEC has. USC is good enough. They should finish at least as a top 4 team in the Big Ten in 2024. This is it for this episode of the JT Sports Podcast. I appreciate all you guys for tuning in. Shout out to my guy, Kate Roan, my guy, Agent K. I appreciate everybody that's tuned in on X. If you're listening on X, give us a like, retweet, and follow us. Also, give us a like, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Also, remember that we're not just a YouTube channel. We are a podcast. You can find this episode and all of our previous ones in audio format on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you get your podcast from. The JT Sports Podcast is available. I appreciate you guys for tuning in,